The house was eerily quiet when I arrived. No welcome from Evelyn, no soft hum of music in the background, and no scent of her favorite candles filling the air. It was strange, almost foreboding, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stepped inside, rolling my suitcase behind me, my mind still preoccupied with the successful pitch I'd delivered at the conference. I was home earlier than planned, hoping to surprise Evelyn and maybe share a quiet evening together. But as I entered the living room, I realized I wasn't the one delivering surprises tonight. There he was, a stranger sitting in my favorite chair. He looked at me with a smug grin, as if he belonged there, as if the house was his. He had that kind of face you wanted to forget, with his perfectly styled hair, tailored blazer, and the kind of arrogance that made your skin crawl. He held a cigar between his fingers, lighting it with deliberate slowness, letting the silence stretch between us. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice calm but sharp. He exhaled a cloud of smoke, leaning back in the chair like he owned it. "Marcus, right?" he said, as if we were old friends. I didn't answer. My eyes shifted to Evelyn, standing by the fireplace, her arms crossed tightly against her chest. She looked smaller than usual, like she was trying to make herself invisible. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, keeping my gaze fixed on him. He smirked, raising the cigar to his lips again before replying. "Adrien," he said simply. "You've heard of me." And just like that, the pieces fell into place. I had heard his name before, in passing. Evelyn had mentioned him once or twice, a new business associate from her workplace. The hints of familiarity in her voice when she spoke about him now made sense. "She's mine now," Adrien said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. He gestured toward Evelyn with the hand holding the cigar, as if she were some kind of trophy he had just won. I didn't react, though the air in the room felt heavy enough to crush me. The man was in my house, in my chair, smoking my cigar, and declaring that my wife now belonged to him. I felt a storm brewing inside me, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing it. Instead, I turned to Evelyn. "Is this true?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. She flinched, her shoulders tightening. For a moment, I thought she might deny it, might tell me this was all some kind of misunderstanding. But she didn't. She just looked at the floor and nodded, a single, small movement that shattered the life we had built together. Adrien laughed, a low, mocking sound. "See? She knows what she wants, Marcus. You can't be mad at her for choosing someone who knows how to treat her right." I let his words hang in the air, studying him, studying her. There was so much I wanted to say, so much anger boiling inside me, but I swallowed it all. "Interesting," I said finally, my tone neutral. Adrien raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my lack of reaction. "That's all you've got to say?" I walked past him, picking up the empty glass on the side table. Another insult, another sign of his arrogance. "For now," I replied, setting the glass down harder than necessary. I turned to Evelyn one last time. "I'll be back for my things," I said simply, my voice devoid of emotion. Adrien called after me as I walked out. "Hey, Marcus, don't take it too hard. You're a good guy, just not good enough." I didn't respond. I didn't look back. As I drove away from the house, the image of Adrien in my chair burned in my mind. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing myself to breathe. He thought he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. The drive away from my house that night was a blur. The weight of Adrien's smug grin and Evelyn's silent betrayal hung heavy in my chest. The world outside the windshield seemed muted, dull compared to the storm raging inside me. I didn't yell or curse. I just gripped the wheel and thought. Adrien's words replayed in my mind. "She's mine now." It wasn't just his arrogance that bothered me. It was the confidence, the way he acted like I was nothing more than a footnote in his grand story. That was what stuck with me. Men like Adrien didn't get that confident by accident. The next morning, I called Caleb, my oldest and most trusted friend. Caleb and I had grown up together, and while I had pursued architecture, he had taken a very different path into cybersecurity and investigations. If there was anyone who could help me understand what I was up against, it was him. "Marcus," Caleb said, his voice sharp with concern. "What's going on? You don't usually call this early." "I need your help," I replied, cutting straight to the point. I need you to find out everything you can about someone. His name is Adrien. There was a pause on the line before Caleb replied. Does this have to do with Evelyn? Yes, I said simply. And I need you to keep this between us. Understood, Caleb said, his tone serious. I'll get back to you as soon as I have something. While I waited for Caleb's findings, I decided to reach out to Maya, Evelyn's best friend. Maya had always been blunt, the kind of person who didn't shy away from hard truths. If anyone knew what had been going on with Evelyn, it was her. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where conversations blended into the background noise. Maya looked uncomfortable when she saw me, her expression a mix of guilt and pity. Marcus, she began, sitting down across from me. I didn't expect to hear from you. I need answers, I said, skipping the pleasantries. I know about Adrien. I know about Evelyn. What I don't know is how it got this far. Maya hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. I tried to warn her, she admitted. Adrien isn't who he seems to be. He's charming, sure, but he's manipulative. I told Evelyn to be careful, but she wouldn't listen. Why not? I pressed. She was vulnerable, Maya said carefully. You've been so busy with work, Marcus. She felt ignored. Adrien gave her attention, made her feel special, but I swear, I didn't think it would go this far. By the time I left the cafe, my emotions were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and determination. Evelyn's betrayal wasn't just about Adrien. It was about cracks in our marriage that I hadn't seen, or maybe hadn't wanted to see. That evening, Caleb called with the first round of information. Adrien's real name is Adrien Miles, Caleb said. He's a smooth operator, Marcus. He's made a habit of targeting women like Evelyn, successful, vulnerable, and connected. He seduces them, gets close to their money, and then uses their connections to further his own shady ventures. I clenched my jaw, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. What kind of ventures? Corporate espionage, mostly, Caleb explained. He uses relationships to gain access to sensitive information, then sells it to the highest bidder. It's not just about money, it's about leverage. As I hung up the phone, the weight of Caleb's words sank in. Adrien hadn't just seduced Evelyn for his own amusement. He had been targeting me through her. My work, my contracts, my connections, all of it had made me a target. I sat in my office, staring out the window at the city lights, my mind racing. Adrien thought he was in control, that he could use Evelyn to dismantle everything I'd built. But he had underestimated me. If Adrien wanted to play games, I'd make sure he didn't just lose. I'd make sure he never played again. The web of deceit he had woven was about to be unraveled, thread by thread, until there was nothing left but ashes. The days following my conversations with Caleb and Maya were a blur of planning and reflection. I wasn't a man who let things fester. Adrien thought he'd walked into my life and taken control, but he'd made one fatal mistake, underestimating me. I had no intention of lashing out blindly. Men like Adrien thrived on chaos, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I would dismantle his arrogance piece by piece. I just didn't realize that my first break in this plan would come from someone I didn't even know. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when I received the email. The subject line read, "We need to talk about Adrien Miles." I almost deleted it, assuming it was junk, but something about the phrasing caught my eye. I clicked it open to find a short, cryptic message. "You don't know me, but I know Adrien. If you want to understand the danger he poses, meet me at the coffee house on 8th Street at 5 p.m. Ask for Selena." Selena. The name meant nothing to me, but the tone of the email intrigued me. There was no desperation in the words, no plea for attention, just a quiet confidence that told me this was no ordinary contact. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. The coffee house was a small, dimly lit cafe tucked between two office buildings. It wasn't the kind of place I frequented, which made it the perfect setting for a clandestine meeting. I arrived a few minutes early, scanning the room until my eyes landed on her. Selena was striking. Dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, sharp cheekbones, and a no-nonsense demeanor that set her apart from the other patrons. She caught my gaze and nodded toward the seat across from her. You must be Marcus, she said as I sat down. Her voice was calm, measured. And you're Selena, I replied. Why are we here? She leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes locking onto mine. Because you're not the first man Adrien has tried to destroy, and you won't be the last unless someone stops him. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had suspected Adrien's schemes ran deep, but hearing it confirmed by a stranger added a new layer of urgency. Why do you care? I asked, keeping my tone neutral. Selena's lips curled into a bitter smile. Because I used to be his partner. Years ago, Adrien and I ran scams together. I helped him set up his operations, build his network, even seduce his marks. But he betrayed me, left me to take the fall when one of our deals went sideways. Her expression hardened, her hands curling into fists on the table. I lost everything because of him. And now, I make it my mission to make sure he never does it to anyone else. Selena's story was as compelling as it was horrifying. She detailed how Adrien worked, his ability to charm his way into lives, his skill at using people's weaknesses against them, and his ruthless determination to come out on top no matter the cost. He's not just after your wife, Selena said. He's after your business, your connections, your life. Evelyn is just a stepping stone to what he really wants. I nodded, my mind racing. And what does he want from me? Your government contract, she said bluntly. That's his endgame. He wants to sell access to your project to the highest bidder. He doesn't care about Evelyn. She's just leverage. Hearing the truth from Selena made everything click into place. Adrien wasn't just a man trying to ruin my marriage. He was a predator with far-reaching ambitions. And now, I had a weapon of my own, Selena's knowledge. I'm going to stop him, I said, my voice steady. Selena leaned back in her chair, a small smirk playing on her lips. Good. Because I'm going to help you. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Because taking him down is personal for me, she replied. And because you're the first person who might actually be able to finish what I started. As I walked out of the cafe, the rain falling softly around me, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Adrien had walked into my life thinking he could take everything from me. But now, with Selena's help, I was going to make sure he lost everything instead. The game had shifted, and the hunter was about to become the hunted. Adrien's arrogance was a weapon, one he wielded to manipulate, deceive, and conquer. But arrogance had a way of blinding people, and I was counting on it. With Selena's revelations about his intentions and tactics, I knew I had to tread carefully. This wasn't just about him and Evelyn anymore. This was about dismantling Adrien's entire operation and making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. But first, I needed to confirm something. How deeply was Evelyn involved? That night, I sat across from her at the dinner table, the silence between us heavy and cold. The same table where Adrien had sat, puffing his cigar and smirking like he owned the world. I couldn't look at it without remembering his smug face. But tonight wasn't about my anger. Tonight was about answers. Evelyn pushed her food around on her plate, barely eating. Her once confident demeanor had faded into something quieter, more subdued. How was your day? I asked casually, breaking the silence. She blinked, surprised by the question. Fine, she said quickly, avoiding my gaze. Busy at work? I pressed, keeping my tone light. She hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, a lot going on. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Anything you want to talk about? Her fork froze midair, and she finally looked up at me. Why are you asking me this now, Marcus? Just curious, I replied, shrugging. You've been distracted lately. I thought maybe there was something you wanted to share. Her eyes darted away, and for a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth. But instead, she shook her head. No, nothing. After dinner, I retreated to my office, where Selena and Caleb were waiting on a secure video call. She's hiding something, I told them, pacing the room. But I don't know if she's actively helping Adrien, or if she's just in too deep to see the truth. Selena leaned closer to the camera, her expression thoughtful. It's possible she doesn't know the full extent of Adrien's plans. He's good at compartmentalizing, only telling people what they need to know to keep them under control. Caleb nodded in agreement. If Evelyn were fully complicit, She wouldn't be this nervous around you. She's guilty, sure, but probably more of betrayal than criminal intent. I sighed, rubbing the back of my neck. Then we need to show her who Adrien really is. She needs to see the full picture. The next morning, I left a folder on the kitchen counter before heading to work. Inside were carefully curated pieces of information Caleb and Selena had gathered. Adrien's fraudulent dealings, his history with other women, and his real motives for targeting me. When I returned that evening, the folder was gone, and Evelyn was sitting on the couch, her hands clenched tightly together. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "You went through my things?" she accused, holding up the folder. "I didn't need to," I replied calmly. "Adrien's story is easy to find if you know where to look. The question is, how much of it did you already know?" She shook her head, tears spilling over. "I didn't know this. I swear. Marcus. I didn't know." "Then why didn't you tell me about him when it started?" I asked, my voice firm but not angry. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. "I thought he cared about me. I thought he understood me in a way you didn't anymore." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. "And now?" She looked up at me, her expression desperate. "Now I see what he really is. Marcus, I'm sorry. I made a mistake." I studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "You're right. You did. But I need you to understand something, Evelyn. This isn't just about you and me anymore. Adrien isn't just some smooth talker who swept you off your feet. He's a criminal. And if you want to fix this, you need to decide whose side you're really on." Her lip trembled, and she nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes." Later that night, I updated Selena and Caleb. "She's shaken," I told them. "I think she's starting to see the truth." "Good," Selena replied. "Because Adrien's next move is coming, and if she's not ready, she'll just be another piece of collateral damage." I clenched my fists, determination coursing through me. Adrien thought he could manipulate everyone around him, but his game was falling apart, and I would make sure he knew exactly who had outplayed him. Evelyn's shift in demeanor was subtle but undeniable. The once confident woman who had laughed at my jokes and planned our future now moved through the house like a ghost, her steps hesitant, her words few. I could see the cracks forming, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She was starting to see Adrien for who he truly was, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Adrien still thought he was in control. He was still playing his game, confident that I was just a broken man licking my wounds. What he didn't know was that I was already setting the trap. Selena and Caleb were instrumental in building the perfect bait. Adrien's greed was his greatest weakness, and it was time to exploit it. With Caleb's help, I planted information about a lucrative deal tied to my company, a fake contract with a fabricated client that would seem too good to pass up. "This deal has to look airtight," I told Caleb during one of our late-night calls. "No red flags, no loopholes. Adrien needs to believe it's real." "Don't worry," Caleb replied, his voice calm and assured. "By the time we're done, Adrien will think he's struck gold." Selena, meanwhile, be her connections to ensure the deal reached Adrien through the right channels. "He'll hear about it from someone he trusts," she explained. "Someone who won't make him question its legitimacy." A week later, the trap was set. The fabricated contract, complete with forged documents and a phony client representative, was floated into Adrien's orbit. It didn't take long for him to bite. Evelyn was the first to mention it, her voice hesitant as she brought it up during dinner. "Adrien said he's working on a big deal," she said, her eyes flicking up to meet mine. "Oh," I replied casually, cutting into my steak. "What kind of deal?" She hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "Something about a government contract. He said it could be life-changing." I fought back a smirk, keeping my expression neutral. "Sounds ambitious." Evelyn nodded, her gaze dropping to her plate. He seemed excited about it. Adrien's arrogance played right into my hands. Over the next few days, Caleb tracked his every move, watching as he started reaching out to investors and attempting to position himself as the key player in the deal. "He's putting everything he has into this," Caleb reported. "If this blows up, he'll be ruined." "That's the idea," I replied. Meanwhile, Evelyn's doubts about Adrien continued to grow. She confronted him one evening, her voice shaking as she asked about the inconsistencies in his stories. "Why didn't you tell me about your past?" she demanded. "The other women, the scams. Why didn't you tell me?" Adrien laughed it off, his charm on full display. "Come on, Evelyn. You're listening to Marcus now? He's just trying to turn you against me because he can't handle losing you." But I could see the cracks forming in his facade. He was losing his grip, and he knew it. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Selena delivered a fake email from the client to Adrien, inviting him to a private meeting to finalize the deal. The meeting, of course, was nothing more than a carefully staged setup designed to expose him for the fraud he truly was. "Are you sure he'll show up?" Selena asked, her expression serious. I nodded. He can't resist. This is everything he's been working toward. The night before the meeting, Evelyn approached me in the living room, her face pale. "Marcus," she said quietly, "I think I made a mistake." I set down my book, looking up at her. "What kind of mistake?" Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I believed him. I believed everything he told me. But now I don't know what to believe." I studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes we see what we want to see, Evelyn. But the truth has a way of coming out." She looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. "Can we fix this?" "That depends," I replied. "Are you ready to face the truth?" As she nodded slowly, I knew the moment of reckoning was drawing closer. Adrien thought he was about to secure the deal of a lifetime, but by the time the trap snapped shut, he would be left with nothing. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice, and Adrien was about to learn the price of his arrogance. The morning of Adrien's big deal meeting was oddly quiet. Evelyn sat across from me at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she hadn't touched. The dark circles under her eyes told me she hadn't slept well, and the tension in her shoulders gave away the battle raging inside her. "You're quiet today," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She glanced up at me, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Just thinking," she murmured, her voice barely audible. I wanted to ask what she was thinking about, but I didn't need to. The weight of her guilt and the unraveling of Adrien's lies were finally catching up with her. She was standing at a crossroads, and I could see she wasn't sure which direction to take. After breakfast, Evelyn retreated to her office, and I went about my day as though it were any other. But Caleb was already feeding me live updates on Adrien's activities. "He's on the move," Caleb reported over the phone. "He's meeting one of his investors at noon. Looks like he's trying to secure more funding before the big meeting." "Perfect," I replied, pacing my office. "Let him think he's winning. The harder he pushes, the more it'll hurt when he falls." Caleb chuckled. "This guy's going to crash hard, Marcus. You've set this up perfectly." I hung up, leaning back in my chair, the satisfaction of Adrien's impending downfall tempered by a lingering ache. Evelyn was still caught in the middle, and while I wanted justice, I couldn't help but hope she'd find clarity before it was too late. That clarity came sooner than I expected. Later that afternoon, I found Evelyn in the living room, sitting on the couch with a small box in her lap. She looked up when I entered, her expression conflicted. "What's that?" I asked, nodding toward the box. She hesitated before opening it, revealing a collection of trinkets, photos, and letters. "Adrien gave me these," she admitted. "He said they were from his past, that they represented the struggles he overcame." I wanted to believe him, but now, I don't know. I stepped closer, my curiosity piqued. "May I?" She handed me a photograph, her hand trembling slightly. It was a picture of Adrien with another woman, his arm draped casually over her shoulders. But it wasn't just the intimacy that caught my attention. It was the woman's expression. She looked eerily similar to Evelyn, with the same soft features and hesitant smile. "He told me she was an old friend," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "But now I think she was someone like me, someone he used." I sat beside her, placing the photo back in the box. "Evelyn, you need to understand something," I said gently. "Adrien doesn't care about people. He cares about what they can give him. He saw you as an opportunity, not as a person." Tears welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head. "I was so stupid. I wanted to feel important, to feel seen. And he made me believe I was." I nodded, my voice calm but firm. That's what he does. He finds vulnerabilities and exploits them. But you're not stupid, Evelyn. You're human. And now you have a choice to make. She wiped her tears, her expression hardening. What choice? To face the truth, I replied. To accept that Adrien lied to you, manipulated you, and used you to get to me. And to help me make sure he can't do this to anyone else. She stared at me for a long moment before nodding. What do you need me to do? That evening, while Adrien prepared for his meeting, Evelyn made her decision. She handed me her phone, giving me access to every text, email, and voicemail Adrien had sent her. He thinks I'm meeting him tonight, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in her posture. But I'm not. I'm done with him. Her words carried a weight that surprised me. For the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with, the woman who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. As I left the house to meet Caleb and Selena, I felt a sense of vindication. Evelyn's awakening wasn't just a win for me. It was a victory over Adrien's manipulations. But the game wasn't over yet. Adrien still thought he was in control, and tonight, he'd learned just how wrong he was. By the time his big deal fell apart, he wouldn't just lose his pride. He'd lose everything. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that felt almost unnatural. Evelyn had gone to bed early, her exhaustion clear after the day's revelations. Her confrontation with Adrien had left her shaken, but I could tell something else was growing in her. Resolve. For the first time in weeks, I saw her as more than just a pawn in Adrien's game. She was starting to see through his lies, starting to understand the web of manipulation he had spun around her. But there was still work to be done. Adrien's arrogance remained unchecked, and his big deal, meeting tomorrow, was the perfect opportunity to bring it all crashing down. I spent most of the evening in my office, going over the final details with Caleb and Selena. The fake deal we had constructed had worked better than I could have imagined. Adrien was fully invested, both financially and emotionally, believing he was on the verge of securing a multi-million-dollar contract. He's already called 2 more investors today, Caleb reported over the secure video call. He's promising them massive returns. They're buying it. Selena smirked, leaning back in her chair. Classic Adrien, always overplaying his hand. I nodded, my jaw tightening. Let's make sure tomorrow leaves no room for him to recover. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that projected confidence and control. This wasn't just about confronting Adrien. It was about reclaiming the narrative he had stolen from me. As I prepared to leave, Evelyn appeared in the doorway of my office. She looked hesitant, but her eyes held a determination I hadn't seen in weeks. Are you going to the meeting? She asked quietly. I nodded, straightening my tie. Yes, it's time to end this. She stepped closer, her hands twisting nervously. Marcus, I know I've said this before, but I'm sorry. I should have seen through him sooner. I should have trusted you. I looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. We all make mistakes, Evelyn. What matters is what we do to fix them. Her lips pressed together, and she gave a small nod. Then fix this. Make sure he doesn't hurt anyone else. The meeting was set to take place in a sleek, high-end office building downtown. The kind of place Adrien would feel at home in, surrounded by wealth and power. As I walked into the conference room, I found him already there, pacing the floor and talking animatedly on his phone. Marcus, he said with a wide grin, hanging up as soon as he saw me. Glad you could make it. I didn't think you'd have the guts to show up. I forced a polite smile, taking a seat at the table. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Adrien sat across from me, exuding his usual confidence. He leaned back in his chair, lighting a cigar. The same brand he had smoked in my house weeks ago. The gesture was deliberate, meant to provoke me. I have to say, he began, exhaling a puff of smoke, this deal is going to be a game changer. You might even thank me one day for showing you how to make real money. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my tone neutral. Is that so? Oh, absolutely, he said, leaning forward. This is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. And lucky for me, I've got the connections to make it happen. As he spoke, Caleb and Selena were in the building's security room, monitoring every word. The client Adrien believed he was meeting was actually an actor hired to play the part, feeding him just enough information to keep him hooked. The final blow came when Adrien pulled out a stack of documents, sliding them across the table toward me. "This is it," he said, his grin widening. "The contract. All we need is a signature, and we're in business." I picked up the papers, flipping through them slowly. The language was elaborate, the numbers impressive, but it was all smoke and mirrors. "You've really outdone yourself," I said, setting the papers down. Adrien's grin faltered, confusion flashing in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. "It means this deal doesn't exist. It never did. And by the time the authorities are done with you, neither will your reputation." The color drained from Adrien's face as the doors opened behind him. Two men in suits entered the room, their expressions cold and professional. "Adrien Miles," one of them said, holding up a badge. "We need to have a conversation about your recent business activities." Adrien shot to his feet, his cigar falling to the floor. "What the hell is this? Marcus, you set me up?" I stood, adjusting my cufflinks. "You set yourself up, Adrien. I just made sure the right people were watching." As the agents led him away, I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me. Adrien's game was over, and his pride was reduced to nothing but ashes. But my work wasn't done yet. Evelyn still had a choice to make, and I wasn't going to wait forever. By the time Adrien was escorted out of the building, his arrogance had evaporated like smoke from the cigar he dropped on the floor. He had walked into that meeting with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him success, but he left as a shadow of himself, cuffed and speechless. I stayed behind in the conference room for a few moments, allowing the satisfaction of his downfall to settle in. This was justice, not just for me, but for every person Adrien had manipulated, used, and discarded. But as satisfying as it was, I knew this wasn't the end. Adrien had burned too many bridges, and the ripple effects of his actions were just beginning to unfold. Later that evening, I attended a charity gala, a high-profile event that was perfect for tying off the final threads of this chapter. It wasn't my usual scene, but I knew Adrien's former investors and acquaintances would be there, desperate for answers after hearing about his arrest. I arrived alone, dressed in a sharp black suit, determined to project calm and control. Evelyn hadn't asked to come, though I suspected she knew I was attending. Her guilt and shame had kept her away from the spotlight lately, but tonight wasn't about her. Tonight was about making sure Adrien's reputation was destroyed beyond repair. As I entered the grand ballroom, the murmur of conversations slowed, and heads turned in my direction. Word had spread quickly, and I could see the curiosity and concern in their eyes. Marcus, one of Adrien's former investors, an older man named Richard, approached me with a tight smile. "I wasn't expecting to see you here tonight." "I wasn't expecting to attend," I replied smoothly, but recent events made it impossible to stay away. Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Adrien, he's been arrested. Do you know anything about it?" I let a small, calculated smile curve my lips. "I might. Let's just say his business practices didn't hold up under scrutiny." Richard's face darkened, and he muttered something under his breath before excusing himself. The ripple effect began, as whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Selena arrived shortly after, her presence a calculated addition to the evening. She had been instrumental in bringing Adrien down, and now she was here to ensure his downfall wasn't forgotten. Together, we maneuvered through the crowd, subtly sharing just enough details to spark curiosity and confirm Adrien's guilt. "Did you hear about the fake contract?" Selena said to one group, her voice low but loud enough to carry. "It was all a sham. Adrien was funneling money into shell accounts to cover his debts." "And the investors?" another person asked. "Wiped out," I replied calmly. "It's tragic, really, but not surprising, given his track record." The evening took a dramatic turn when one of Adrien's close associates, a man named Paul, confronted me near the bar. His face was flushed, his voice low but sharp. "You planned this, didn't you?" he accused, stepping closer. "You set him up." I sipped my drink, meeting his gaze with an unflinching stare. "Adrien set himself up. I just made sure the truth came to light. Paul's mouth opened as if to argue, but he stopped himself, shaking his head and walking away. As the night went on, the buzz around Adrien's arrest grew louder. By the time I left, the room was filled with speculation, anger, and disbelief. His name, once whispered in admiration, was now spoken with disdain. When I returned home, Evelyn was waiting for me in the living room. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with apprehension. "How was it?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, setting down my keys. "As expected. Everyone knows now. Adrien's finished." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "And you? How do you feel?" I paused, considering her question. "Satisfied," I said finally. "But there's still work to be done." Evelyn's gaze dropped to her hands. "I know I've hurt you, Marcus, and I don't know if I can ever make it right, but I want to try." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. "I'll think about it," I said, my tone even. "But for now, I need to focus on cleaning up the mess Adrien left behind." She nodded, her shoulders sagging with relief and guilt. As I headed upstairs, I allowed myself a small smile. Adrien's pride had been reduced to ashes, and Evelyn was finally beginning to understand the cost of betrayal. But forgiveness wasn't something I could give freely, not yet. There was still a long road ahead, and I wasn't going to let anyone else control the journey. The fallout from Adrien's arrest was swift and unforgiving. By the time the evening news picked up the story, his face was plastered across every screen, his fraudulent schemes dissected in meticulous detail. Words like embezzlement, corporate espionage, and fraud were repeated with relish by every anchor. Adrien Miles, the man who once thought he could take everything from me, was now the public face of disgrace. I sat in my office, the glow of the television casting shadows on the walls, a glass of whiskey in my hand. Caleb called, his voice carrying the satisfaction we both felt. "It's over," he said simply. "It's only just beginning," I replied, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. Adrien might have been exposed, but his downfall wasn't just about the arrest. It was about dismantling the power he had built, ensuring there was nothing left of his empire for him to reclaim. The first step was targeting his financial backers. Many of them had been complicit in Adrien's schemes, turning a blind eye to his questionable practices in exchange for promised returns. Caleb had meticulously documented their involvement, and now, with the help of Selena, we began feeding that information to the right people. Within days, Adrien's name became a black mark in the business world. Former allies scrambled to distance themselves, denying any knowledge of his actions while quietly dissolving partnerships and cutting ties. Selena was particularly ruthless. She contacted every major investor Adrien had ever swindled, sharing details of his scams and offering to help them recover their losses by testifying against him. "Let them fight over the scraps," she said with a smirk during one of our strategy meetings. "By the time they're done, there won't be anything left for Adrien to salvage." Meanwhile, Evelyn was dealing with her own reckoning. She had started receiving calls from friends and acquaintances, some offering sympathy, others expressing thinly veiled judgment. The woman who had once basked in the glow of admiration was now forced to confront the reality of her choices. One evening, as I worked in my office, she knocked softly on the door. "Come in," I said without looking up. She stepped inside, hesitating before speaking. "Marcus, can we talk?" I set down my pen, leaning back in my chair. "What about?" Her eyes were red, her hands twisting nervously. "About everything. About us." I studied her for a moment before gesturing for her to sit. "Go ahead." She sat across from me, her posture tense. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I don't know if I can ever fix it." "Adrien wasn't just a mistake, Evelyn," I said, my voice calm but firm. "He was a choice. You chose to trust him over me. You chose to believe his lies. And now you're living with the consequences." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was selfish. I was stupid. I thought he cared about me. But he didn't. He never did." I nodded, leaning forward slightly. "So now you see him for who he really is. But what about you, Evelyn? Do you see yourself for who you are? Her breath hitched, and she wiped at her tears. I want to make things right, Marcus. I want to prove to you that I can be better. I let her words hang in the air before responding. Proving it isn't about what you say, Evelyn. It's about what you do. And right now, you need to focus on figuring out who you are without him, without me. After she left, I sat alone in the quiet, reflecting on her words. I could see she was sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight, and I wasn't ready to let her back in. The next morning, Caleb called with an update. Adrien's plea deal fell apart, he said, his tone smug. He tried to shift the blame onto his investors, but they turned on him. He's looking at serious jail time now. Good, I replied, the weight on my chest finally starting to lift. Adrien's fall wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure. He had walked into my life, tried to take everything I'd built, and failed spectacularly. Now, he was facing the consequences of his arrogance, and I was finally free to move forward. As I hung up the phone, I allowed myself a small smile. Adrien's pride had been reduced to ashes, just like the cigar he had once smoked in my chair. And now, it was time for me to rebuild my life, on my terms. The dust had finally settled. Adrien Miles was no longer a looming figure in my life. He was a disgraced man, locked away in a jail cell, his schemes exposed, his reputation destroyed. Every thread of his web had been unraveled, leaving him with nothing but the hollow consequences of his arrogance. It should have felt like victory, and in some ways it did. But the destruction of Adrien didn't erase the damage he had caused. Not to my marriage, not to Evelyn, and not to the man I had once been. I stood in my office, looking out at the city skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. The soft orange glow bathed the room in light, a stark contrast to the chaos I had endured over the past few months. Evelyn was downstairs, her presence now more subdued, her attempts at reconciliation more careful. She had begun to pick up the pieces of her life, but the cracks in her foundation were still visible. She knocked on the door, hesitating before stepping inside. "Marcus," she said softly. I turned, meeting her gaze. She looked tired but determined. "What is it?" She took a step closer, wringing her hands. "I wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked, my tone even. "For everything," she said, her voice trembling. "For not giving up on me completely. For exposing Adrien. For still being here." I leaned back against my desk, crossing my arms. "Evelyn, let me be clear. I didn't do this for you. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Adrien needed to be stopped. You were caught in his web, but you weren't innocent. You chose to trust him over me. That's not something I can easily forget." She nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want you to know that I'm trying. I'm going to therapy. I'm working on myself. I want to be better, not just for you, but for me." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of the woman I had fallen in love with. That night, I sat alone in the living room, thinking about the future. The satisfaction of Adrien's downfall had faded, replaced by a quiet sense of reflection. Revenge had been necessary, but it wasn't the end of the story. I pulled out a journal, something I hadn't touched in years, and began writing. Not about the betrayal or the pain, but about what came next. Who I wanted to be. What I wanted to rebuild. The next morning, I met Selena for coffee. She had been instrumental in bringing Adrien down, and I owed her more than I could express. "So, what's next for you?" she asked, sipping her latte. I smiled faintly. "I'm not sure yet, but I know I'm ready to move forward." She nodded, a spark of approval in her eyes. "You've done more than most people would, Marcus. Don't let this define you. Let it empower you." Her words stayed with me as I returned home. Evelyn was in the garden when I arrived, tending to the plants she had neglected during the chaos. She looked up as I approached, a cautious hope in her eyes. "Are you okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I think I am." She hesitated, then said, "I know I don't deserve another chance, Marcus, but I want to earn it. I want to prove to you that I can be the person you deserve." I looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her words settling over me. Evelyn, trust isn't something that can be rebuilt overnight. But if you're serious about earning it, then we'll see where it takes us. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. Thank you. That evening, as I sat in my favorite chair, the one Adrien had arrogantly claimed as his own, I lit a cigar. The scent filled the room, a reminder of how far I had come. Adrien had tried to destroy me, to take everything I held dear. But in the end, he had only destroyed himself. And as the smoke curled around me, I realized something. I wasn't just reclaiming my life. I was rebuilding it, stronger than before. The ashes of Adrien's pride had fertilized the soil of my future, and I was ready to start anew.